record to.
There we go.
All right, and I'm sharing my screen. PowerPoint, no, everything. Is that, am I sharing my screen there?
Yes, yeah, we see.
All right. All right. So Reverend Sule, he kind of already introduced me and that sort of thing. Yeah, my name's Dale Glover. I grew up a true Bible believing Christian for most of my life, within the Baptist denomination there. And like I said, I never really had any doubts. I think most people, it's as a teenager in high school or during university that you kind of struggle or come across doubts. And that never happened to me until I got my first job. And then I was encountering atheists and a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses. And because of that, I was kind of realizing, okay, there are some arguments against my faith. And I needed to really, okay, let me take some time and figure out what is the truth here. And as I said, I went on oh, Karis is trying to be admitted. Okay,
Yes.
so I went on an 8-year search, looking at the religions. What are some of the evidences for and against these religions? And in the end, in 2018, I realized that Christianity unique has evidence for it there. Uh, so I'm hearing some kind of background. I don't know if that person just, yep, okay, cool. Yeah, and then I came to faith in Christ on May 5th, 2018. And as Suli mentioned, I was baptized in your guys' church. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for inviting me in and to get baptized, and also now to teach this topic to you guys, because this was one of the Shroud of Turin was one of the main reasons I came back to faith in Christ. So let's kind of get into this. Um, okay, so I think everyone here will agree that the resurrection, the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus is probably one of the most essential and foundational beliefs of the Christian faith. And as I said during my research, I found that Christianity is actually unique among all the world's religions, and that it can actually provide evidence on the basis of rational standards for the truth of this foundational claim. And on that front, I found that Christians have an embarrassment of riches, because not only do we have, I think this church will be familiar, there is the historical evidence for the resurrection. So people like Dr. Tony Costa or Gary Habermas, Mike Lacona, they'll present that minimal facts approach for the resurrection. But so that was part of my story as well. But what I found amazing is that in addition to that, we also have scientific evidence for the resurrection. And that comes in with the Shroud of Turin, which I want to present to you guys today and get you kind of familiar with it. But just before I get started, just a couple of questions, and I guess Suli can tell me. But just by a show of hands, who here is familiar or has heard of the Shroud of Turin before?
Think I have, but never followed it.
Okay. So I'm seeing kind of a mixed bag. Some of you were saying yes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So it may be new to most of you guys there. And just out of curiosity, does anyone want to share anything that you know about the Shroud, or anything that you've heard, just, pop culture or anything like that? Suli, you'll tell me if someone's raising their hand.
I don't see anybody raising their hand, but
That's
you
fine.
know, is the idea of the Shroud of Turin is this living process we know that was supposedly wrapped around a crucified individual, and it seemed like they have the marks that Jesus would have. Uh,
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. So perfect. You kind of answered. Here's a picture, full picture of the Shroud of Turin. So it's basically, this is a long linen cloth. It's about 14 feet long by 3.5 feet wide. And it has both the front image and the back image. The back image is kind of blocked by this panel here, but the front and back images of a man who appears to have been crucified. He has the nail wounds in the wrist and on the feet. As well, there are many bloodstains consistent with scourge wounds, that seem to look like a Roman scourge weapon. There's also wounds on the forehead, on the head, that represent the crown of thorns. And finally, there's a major wound right in the chest that looks like it's the result of a spear going through and piercing the heart. And interestingly, on the shroud, it's been studied. There is actually two separate fluids. There's blood and water, just like we learn in the Gospel of John.
Mhm.
So, on this basis, many scientists and experts have concluded that the images on the shroud represent Jesus Christ and that the cloth itself is the actual burial cloth mentioned in the Gospels. So, that's kind of the pro shroud position. Now, obviously, as Sule mentioned, he himself is a little bit skeptical. So there are always skeptics who deny this. And their claim is that, look, this Shroud of Turin, it's just another Roman Catholic hoax. It was made a painting made up in the medieval period and in France around the 1300s. And it's just another hoax. I mean, look how many splinters from the cross of Christ are there out there? How, the spear of Longinus, how many of those kind of claims have been out there? So a lot of skeptics just kind of dismiss this as another Roman Catholic medieval hoax. And what's interesting is that I find in my experience, the most hostile skeptics to Shroud aren't actually, the typical atheists and agnostics. It's actually coming from Christians. So I have a quote here from none other than John Calvin himself, who kind of says, I would like to I would like to, let me just move this. I would like to ask, why is it that while the evangelists carefully related the miracles which took place at the death of Christ, and they leave out nothing to the history, but yet this amazing miracle made so little impact that they said nothing about the impression of our Lord's body stamped on his grave clothes? So he's kind of hinting at, well, Shroud of Turin, images on a cloth. I don't see that in my Bible. I don't see that in the Gospel. So why is that not being mentioned here? So here's kind of the two sides, and we have to decide, well, who's correct? Is the Shroud of Turin just a medieval hoax, or is it actually the authentic burial cloth of Christ? And I'm hoping to provide you guys with a glimpse over the next 4 weeks of the evidence as to why I think it is authentic. So here's kind of the agenda. So today we're just going to look
Sorry,
at it.
Dale,
Yep.
before you go on, can I ask us to mute our mics? Because there's some feedback that is coming on. And if you need to ask the question, just unmute your mic and ask. But there's some noise coming back. If you could do that, please.
Gotcha. Good. Just let me know when we're good. All right.
Otherwise, oh,
Some.
it's a
Okay.
question.
So for today's class, we're really just going to kind of take a look at an introduction to the Shroud of Turin, what it is, and that sort of thing, why it's important. But also looking at the scientific evidence about the images. What is it that makes these images remarkable? Why should we even care about it? And then next week, we're going to be looking at, okay, great. Now we know what the images are and why they're remarkable. But what are some of the explanations out there? What have the skeptics come up with to explain it? Is it a medieval painting, or can we prove that they were formed supernaturally in some way? And then the third week, we're going to be switching gears and looking at the historical evidence. How do we link the shroud historically to Jesus Christ? And then lastly, we're going to look at some of the main objections that shroud skeptics give, about 3 to 4 of the main objections, and how do we respond to that. So that's the plan of action. All right. So the first place, we have to ask, why should we as Christians study the shroud? And on that front, as I've kind of alluded to, I think it's amazing. It really strengthens the faith of a Christian. I mean, look, if you're convinced by the historical evidence or the Gospels for the resurrection, that's great. But now, in addition, we have scientific evidence supporting that claim as well. And when it comes to evidence, I find the more the merrier, right? Especially in this skeptical modern age where so many unbelievers are demanding scientific proof. Well, here it is, kind of type deal.
Mhm.
So there's immense scientific, as well medical value. A lot of medical experts have studied the shroud, its anatomy, and from a forensic perspective. And there's a lot that they've been able to learn just from studying the shroud, even if it's not authentic. Secondly, there's great historical value. Imagine we could prove this did cover Jesus historically. I mean, that would be of immense historical value. And learning how they did Roman crucifixions and just imagining that this cloth actually touched our Lord and Savior. And then finally, most importantly to me, is that there's theological and salvific value. If we can prove that these images are miraculous, well, that could help some unbeliever to recognize the truth of the gospel and come to Christ. So, um, and on this front, I have personal experience with many non-Christians who've actually admitted and that the evidence for the shroud is so powerful they admit that they think the shroud is authentic. So, for example, I've interviewed non-religious Jews, the famous Barry Schwartz, as I have here, and I'll mention him, more on him in a second. But or Dr. Alan Adler, he's one of the scientists we're going to be looking at who studied the shroud, and he was Jewish. He was not a Christian, but the evidence was so strong that he said, "Yes, this is authentic." It may surprise some of you guys to know that Muslims, certain Muslims, accept the shroud's authenticity. So Dr. Shabir Ali has admitted to me that he thinks the shroud images are supernatural. Or there's a sect of Islam called Ahmadiyya Muslims, and their caliph, he's kind of like their main, he's like their pope, I guess, right? And he, in 2010, officially accepted the shroud as being authentic to Jesus Christ. And in addition to that, there are also atheists and agnostics. So I've interviewed John Loken, as well, medieval art historian Dr. Thomas de Weselo. So you can see there's a lot of opportunity here where even non-Christians are admitting the evidence is good. And that presents us with an opportunity to use that to preach the full gospel and try to bring them to Christ. Okay, Julie needs in. And so, as I said, there are two main aspects to shroud study. So the first is the historical authenticity. Did it cover Jesus in the tomb? And we'll be looking at that in the weeks 3 and 4 mostly. But then there's the question we're looking at for the first 2 weeks. Is it authentically a miracle? What does the scientific evidence have to say? And on that front, now, just before I get into that, I just want to note and honor my friend Barry Schwartz. I mentioned he was a non-Christian Jew he was the official photographer of the shroud. If you see a picture on the shroud on the internet, he's the one that took it. He was the official photographer, and um, sadly, he passed away 2 weeks ago on June 21st. But I just want to honor his memory. He was an amazing scholar and a gentleman, and he made it his mission in life to present the evidence and the truth about the evidence on the shroud to Christians. And many people have come to faith, including myself, thanks to Barry's efforts. So I just wanted to honor his memory there for a second. So, someone taking a picture. Okay. Okay. So enough said. What is the evidence? What is it about these images that's so remarkable? And to find that out, we have to go back to starting in the year 1898. And as I said, for centuries, most of the scientists or the academics, they all said the shroud was just a medieval hoax, a painting, just a painting. But on Saturday, May 28th of 1898, that would all change forever because an amateur photographer, as you can see up here, Secondo Pia, actually was commissioned to take the first official photographs of the shroud. And essentially, so here's what you see with the naked eye on the bottom left here. You can see the image. It's kind of blurry. It's hard to make out. The features, there's no definable borders or anything like that. But back in 1898, they didn't have digital phones or cameras and stuff like that. They had to use traditional film. And what Pia did is when he went to his darkroom to develop his photographic plates, what appeared before him was actually the true photo positive of the image, the black and white image that you're seeing here. Much clearer, more crisp. It has very high resolution. And here's the full body one in black and white here. So the contrast was amazing. This caused Sukarno Pia to say, what the heck? So the image here, as we see it with the naked eye, is a photo negative. It's not the proper image. The true image is what you see when you go in the dark room. And this is the true photographic positive image. Much clearer, more crisp, shows details such as the scourge wounds or the lips, stuff that we can't make out just by looking at it with the naked eye. And remember, the shroud, we know for a fact, goes back at the very latest to the medieval period. No one had modern camera technology back then. How could an artist conceive of a camera technology and a photo negative versus positive image? It's impossible. So this kind of shocked everyone, including the scientists. And oh, some and any questions on this before I move on in terms of this first discovery that was made? We're, we're good. Okay. Okay, cool. So, and because of this finding, here's kind of just a full image of the photo negative. So of the front and the back sides. But this is, as I said, sent shockwaves around the world. And this actually caused other scientists, this time forensic and anatomical experts, Paul Vignon and Dr. Yves Delage. And Yves Delage, he's not a Christian. He's a non-religious agnostic. But because they could now see the images on the shroud clearer, they studied it from a forensic perspective, and they determined actually this is not some artwork. This is whatever caused these images. They are reflecting a real scourged and crucified corpse, and they actually presented their findings to the French Academy of Sciences between 1900 to 1902. So we could tell medically that this covered a real corpse. So that's the second finding there. Everyone's good so far? No questions? Okay.
Okay, can I ask the shroud?
Yep.
It's the first I'm really hearing about this thing. Is it the physical shroud we're talking about, or are we just talking about negatives of pictures taken of the shroud? And where would they keep the shroud? Where did they find it?
Yeah, so it's something physical. The shroud actually exists. It's a cloth that's currently held today in Turin, Italy. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's been there in Turin since 1578. And
Okay.
yeah, you can actually go there. They exhibit it publicly, every 10 years or something like that. So yeah, you can go, it's something you can touch, see and stuff. But the point about the photos, like the photo negativity, this is something that you can't see if you go and look at it in person. Just trying to, I don't know how to move the. So if this is what you see when you look in person, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was only with taking a photograph that we were able to see that it's a photo positive image. The true image is this one that you see in black and white. So that feature only was revealed by using camera technology, if that makes sense. Yep.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
No problem. No problem. All right. So put that back down. Okay. So now, okay, you're probably wondering, well, is that it? Is that all you've got? No, not by a long shot. So let's fast forward a few decades now to basically we found in 1976, some scientists found that the shroud, the images are actually three-dimensional. Now, paintings and photographs are typically two-dimensional images. You can see the image here, right? And at best, all they can do is suggest three-dimensionality using shadows and lights and optical illusions. But this picture right here, it isn't actually 3D. There's no 3D information encoded in this image. With the Shroud of Turin, that's not the case. There's actual three-dimensional information encoded on the shroud. And here's what you can see. So in 1976, a couple of physicists, Dr. Eric Jumper and Dr. John Jackson, these were a couple of scientists at Sandia Laboratories. This is one of the top scientific institutions in the world. It was one of the labs involved in making the atom bomb, for crying out loud. But they took a photo of the shroud, the photo negative, and plugged it into this VP8 image analyzer device. And what came out is that these very accurate dimensional relief of a human form. You can see the three-dimensional face there, the chest and the arms and the hands. And this was all across the body on the front and the back side images. And this is incredible because this, if you take any photograph or any painting and you plug it into a VP8 image analyzer, they won't get three-dimensional results. You get a jumbled up mess. It's because there's no actual 3D info on them. So this is something that's entirely unique to the images on the shroud. And that was something that was incredible, right? So that actually prompted these two scientists, Dr. John Jackson and Eric Jumper, to form a research team and to finally go, what the heck is going on with these shroud images? How can we explain them? How are they made? Because we keep finding more and more features that are just unexplainable if this is just some medieval artwork. Okay, so is everyone good with the three dimensionality? Any questions about that or?
A question.
Yeah.
If a shroud, to me, when I think of it, it's a piece of cloth that covered Christ. How come if it's a piece of cloth that covered him? Where did we get all these images? How did all these images come on the cloth? Did it just come out of the clear blue on the cloth?
Yes. So to some extent, how the images got on the cloth, we're going to be covering that next week in a lot of detail. How did these get, onto this cloth? And skeptics will say, well, it's just an artwork. Someone painted it, or, maybe it's a scorch mark or something like that. Whereas on the pro shred side, what I hope to convey to you guys is that I think some supernatural mechanism took place, a radiation from the body at the moment of the resurrection. I think a burst of radiation came from the body onto and encoded the image onto the cloth. So that's what I'm going to be arguing for next week, and trying to make that case.
So that we could think of this as a miracle.
Absolutely. Yep. That's my point. Perfect. Anyone else? No. Okay, perfect. Okay, so great. So we've got these two findings, but now we've got an actual scientific team specifically tasked to study the shroud in person and figure out how it was made. What did they find when they studied the shroud? And here's just an edge enhanced notion of the three dimensionality of both the front and the back, so you can see what that looks like on the shroud. Okay, so this is they formed STIR. This stands for the Shroud of Turin Research Project. And this is probably the single most important scientific research team with respect to the shroud that has ever existed, because this was a team of American scientists and researchers from, again, the top scientific institutions in the world. I mentioned Sandia Laboratories. There were scientists from Los Alamos. A couple of scientists worked with NASA, for crying out loud. And these were not all Christian believers. It was a mixed bag. They had 3 Jews on the team. They had one Mormon. They had a couple of agnostics, one atheist and a couple of agnostics. So this isn't a team that's just a bunch of biased Christians that are studying the shroud. No, these people were selected for being top scientists. And they actually spent over 2 years preparing a series of tests that would gather a vast amount of shroud data in about 5 days. So on October the 8th through 13th of 1978, they went over in person to Turin, Italy, and studied the shroud scientifically. They used various spectral instruments, various microscopes, and taking things like UV fluorescence studies or an X-ray fluorescence test, transmitted light photographs, and a whole host of other tests. And they also collected hundreds of samples from the images and non-image areas of the shroud to do testing later on in their labs over the next three years. So they conducted these tests between 1978 to 1981 is when they came out with their final report. And like I said, what was Stirp's primary goal? Simply to answer the question, what are the scientific properties of this image on the shroud and determine how the images were made. That's why they were there. Now, and here's kind of a list on great website, shroud.com. And this is just a list of everyone who was involved in Stirp. So you can see who they are and, the top scientific institutions they were from. As well, we actually have Stirp after published all of their findings that I'm going to teach you guys about in secular scientific peer-reviewed journals. And I'll just give you guys a glimpse of that. Okay, so go. Okay. Sorry, guys. Let me move that down. Published papers. Are you guys seeing that, the website?
Mm-hmm.
So you can just kind of see, and this is all on shroud.com for free, but they published over 24 secular peer-reviewed journals related to what they found about the Shroud of Turin's images. And these aren't just, puff pieces. These are in the top journals in the country, things like X-ray spectrometry or applied optics, the Canadian Society of Forensic Sciences journal. So, these aren't puff pieces. These are some of the peer-reviewed journals that have the highest impact factors in the world, literally. So this is, yep. Any questions or? No? Okay, perfect. So let's get back to the slides. Okay, so all right. So I can tell you guys are all asking, well, let's get to it. What did Stirp find? What was it they discovered about these images? And you can see I've kind of this thing keeps blocking. I've broken. So they found literally hundreds of properties about the shroud images. I'm going to be highlighting with you guys for simplicity's sake the top six, just highlighting six of them. So the first is that there is body image uniformity. Okay, so what is this talking about? Well, essentially here's a picture for you. So every colored fibril on the shroud is colored to the exact same degree. So it has the same intensity of color or same darkness of that straw yellow color that makes up the body images of the shroud. So it's not like one fiber is darker than another, or as you'd expect if somebody was just taking a paintbrush and painting it. And there's no evidence of brush strokes or directionality with these. The fibers that are colored perfectly uniform. And what's more, they're colored individually, right? The colored fibers, they're not cemented together. Like if you used a wet paint brush and you painted these images on, some of the fibers would be sticking together or cemented together. So no, this is the first remarkable feature is that each fiber is colored uniformly, exactly the same intensity of color. And that doesn't seem humanly possible for an artist to accomplish. The second major feature is body image superficiality. So this is basically saying that the body image resides only on the top superficial level of the cloth. The color doesn't penetrate down through the cloth. And this is in contrast to the blood stains, right? If you have a liquid like blood, that soaks down into the cloth and it shows up actually on the back of the cloth where the blood stains were. The body image doesn't penetrate. In fact, it's been measured how superficial this image is. So with a single thread, only the top 2 to 3 fibers are colored. Each thread has about 200 fibers. And each fiber has the diameter smaller than that of a human hair, just to kind of give you some measure here. And what's more is that on each fiber, the color is superficial even on each fiber. It only covers the primary cell wall. It's zero point 0.2 micrometers on the thing. Here's a helpful image. Dr. Giulio Fonte put this together with the straws. If the red straws represent the image color, okay, the yellow represents the fibers and that are just left untouched, the natural linen fiber as it would be on a uncolored cloth. You can see it's only on that top level, right? It doesn't penetrate. See the red only on the outer surface, the primary cell wall doesn't soak down into the fibers. I mean, I'm sorry, a paint would definitely penetrate through. Or if you picture a scorch, as we'll learn, scorches would burn right through the fiber. It would show up on the other side of the cloth. It would burn right through in a fraction of a second. So this body image superficiality is another amazing feature that helps us determine what kind of mechanisms could form it.
So,
Um,
Dale,
yeah.
why would that be significant? What is that proving to us?
In terms of the body image superficiality, uh, it's not going to, so it's relevant because when we look at the certain mechanisms next week, it's going to be able to rule out or falsify that those applied. So, just for an example, let's pretend it painting, right? That's the first thing shroud skeptics will say. If the shroud images were painted on, paint is a liquid medium, that would soak right through. That all of this straw would be red. There would be no yellow straws or white straws. So that's why it's relevant. It helps us make sense. Yep. Any other questions or?
May I ask, what's the quality of the shroud? I mean, what type of material was it made of?
Yeah, so it's made of linen. So it was kind of made through in ancient times through the flax plant, and it was placed in a pond, just like every other textile. It's the same as papyrus and stuff, linen.
I just was curious. So if it's made of linen, can they check other linen with similar qualities?
So in terms of the quality of the linen on the shroud, here's something I didn't mention here, but it's also important for understanding how the shroud images were formed. But textiles that are ancient are very typically very brittle. They're in bad shape. They're falling apart. But the shroud is remarkable because it is extremely flexible. It's almost like a modern t-shirt if you were to touch it and feel it. And that's not, even if it's medieval or ancient, that shouldn't be the case. So why the heck is it so flexible? It's almost in too good condition to be explainable natural.
Yeah. Go
Yeah,
back to miracles again. Thanks.
no worries. All right, cool. Um, so here's another feature that I think is really important, but it's really hard for people to understand. But it's the fact that whatever caused the images on the shroud has been mathematically proven to follow a straight line vertical encodation path, or it traveled for the frontal image, it traveled straight up, like you're throwing a fastball just straight up in a vertical direction. And on the backside image, whatever caused that image traveled in a vertical straight line down from the body to the cloth, kind of thing. And I have a helpful picture here just to kind of, so with the Shroud of Turin, picture this is the body, right? So this is the tip of the nose of Jesus, and the cloth is draped over it. I wish my mouse would work fast. But with the Shroud of Turin, whatever caused the image, like picture like a laser beam shooting out of this pore of Jesus' nose, it went vertically straight up. It followed path P here from the body straight up to the cloth. And like I said, the back image, it's the exact same, but from the body straight down to the cloth. It didn't follow. So if you see path A here, where it's a little bit wider, if you had a body covered, just say a corpse covered in a naturally draped shroud, and you press the cloth down to touch the nose, you would get this path A. Or if, let's say, gases out of the body, and those formed the images. You would get path E for emissions because gases diffuse out and make a wider image. But that's not what we have with the shroud. The shroud, whatever caused that image, went from the body in a strictly straight line vertical direction. And as we're going to see that next week, that's remarkable. That falsifies a whole bunch of skeptics' theories. Does that make sense? Because I know that's probably the toughest one to get. Does everyone gets that? Yep. Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
it is a little bit more tricky to understand. So are you trying to say that the linen cloth did not lie flat on his face?
The linen cloth did not lie flat on his
Like,
face.
yeah, like how you have it with the nose and the cloth is on top of it.
Yeah, so I think it covered. Now, even if you like, are you saying if it was flattened out, the shroud was flattened out a bit?
Like it
Is
was molded across the face.
Yeah, so okay, so one thing that we know is that this is not the shroud was not naturally draped like in this way. It wasn't like bent over the face. At the time of the image formation, shroud experts have determined that the shroud cloth kind of flattened out somehow. And there are various explanations as to why that was. There could have been a vacuum when the body, at the moment of the resurrection, the body disappeared, and that created a vacuum that kind of flattened out the cloth a little bit. Uh, so yeah, but again, regardless of whether the cloth is folded over it naturally or flattened out, it followed this straight line vertical path to produce the images.
Then if it's a cloth rested on a body, wouldn't the cloth just lay on the body? So was it between the body and a little above the body? The cloth? Because it's a
Um,
cloth. A cloth is, if I look at a cloth, if I put it on a dead person, it just falls right on the person. So what's the difference? How could it tell that this, when you show this here a little higher than where the nose was? So that I can't understand. How did they come to that conclusion?
oh, yeah. So this, in terms of the way the cloth is, they're not trying to say that this was the actual position of the cloth itself. They're just trying to, at the time of the image formation, they're just trying to say, well, let's pretend we have a naturally draped cloth, and they're trying to illustrate how the directionality of how the image was formed from directly from the body up to the cloth or down. Now, in terms of, well, was it directly touching the body? Wouldn't it just be directly flat? So there are, oh, sorry.
The cloth, so drape the body, so it must be lying on the body.
So there are a couple theories here. So if you are believe it's a natural image, some people say that there were the spice bundles that were brought were actually in solid form and they were placed alongside the body, and then the cloth was over top of that. So because of that, it wasn't directly
On
wrapped
the body.
around, the body and pressed directly to it. It was flattened out a bit as it covered the spice bundles. The other explanation that I go for is the one I was talking about with Sule. It's a supernatural one. It's one where the body instantaneously during the resurrection uh, becomes disappears or becomes mechanically transparent, and during that process, that the radiation burst kind of flattens the cloth out. So originally it was touching it, but then there's that radiation burst, and that causes the cloth to flatten out a bit. Does that make sense? No? Uh, okay. Okay, so yeah, like it's just again, we'll cover this more next week, but we're trying to say that there was something that we think flattened the cloth out a little bit and made it go away from the body. It wasn't tightly pressed to the body at the time the images were formed. Hope that makes sense.
The spices they weren't allowed to wrap till the Sabbath was over. They weren't allowed to put spices on the body, right?
Right. Yeah, they couldn't, they had to stop. So what it looks like is that, and that's one of the features of the shroud that Stirp found is that there are no biochemicals of myrrh and alloys, the things that the Gospels say were brought to Jesus. So what it looks like happened is that they brought these things to the tomb, but they were prevented from completing the full ritual because they were in haste to bury Jesus before sundown on the Sabbath, and so they probably at best did a partial washing, but they obviously couldn't complete a full washing because there's still bloodstains on the shroud. So it looks like they didn't finish the process, and that's why the women were coming back on Sunday morning to finish the job and complete it, but they got interrupted by the Sabbath coming on. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yes.
All right. And all right. Anyone? All right. So the other thing that Stirp found, the first thing that they checked for is, okay, obviously people have said this is a painting. So are there any paints or pigments or dyes and stains on the Shroud of Turin itself? And they tested for every known pigment, paint, or dye in history, known from medieval times up to 1978, and it's not there. There is no paint that makes up the body images or blood stains. The blood stains are composed of blood, and the body images are composed of oxidized cellulose. That's what makes up that yellow color. So what that means is, when you put out a newspaper in the sun and it's exposed to ultraviolet radiation and it turns yellow, that's oxidized cellulose. So that's what makes up the shroud's body images there. As I said, the bloodstains have been proven to be made of real blood. And interestingly, there's no body images underneath the bloodstains. Okay, so the body images terminate precisely at the border of the bloodstains. Now, that wouldn't be the case. If somebody painted this, you would accept a human being will breach the border. Right? There would be some kind of breaching of the border on the shroud's bloodstains and that sort of thing. And especially because with the shroud's bloodstains, they discovered through ultraviolet fluorescence, and I'll just show you guys a picture, there are serum retraction rings. These are invisible to the naked eye. You can't see this if you're just looking at the shroud. It's only through ultraviolet fluorescence that they determine these. See this little white glow around the bloodstains? These are called serum retraction rings. So you have a blood stain, right? Okay, you've got a wound and it's transferred to the cloth. Over time, the bloodstains will retract as they clot and congeal and stuff like that. They'll retract. And as they do, they squeeze out this clear, invisible liquid, serum. And that's what they've discovered around the bloodstains. I'm sorry, paint does not produce serum retraction rings. So this is another proof that it's blood. But remarkably, the body images terminate precisely at the borders of even these invisible serum retraction rings. How could a medieval artist know where to terminate the body images? Because these are invisible to the naked eye. So that's another remarkable feature that will come into play when we're looking at image formation next week. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah. Okay. So last but not least, I just want to finish off with reading you guys what was Stirp's conclusion. So they conducted this massive test to finding out hundreds of features. I've just named about 6 to 8 for you. What was their main conclusion? Well, okay, here it is. So, quote unquote, no pigments, paints, dyes, or stains have been found on the fibrils. X-ray fluorescence and microchemistry on the fibrils preclude the possibility of paint being used as a method for creating the image. Ultraviolet and infrared evaluation confirm these studies, and computer image enhancement and analysis by a device known as the EP8 image analyzer shows that the image has unique three-dimensional information encoded on it. Now, the basic problem from a scientific point of view is that some explanations might be tenable from a chemical point of view, but are precluded by the physical properties of the shroud. On the other hand, some explanations that skeptics offer are consistent with the physical explanations and are attractive on that front, but are completely precluded by the chemistry. For an adequate explanation of the image on the shroud, one must have an explanation which is scientifically sound from a physical, chemical, biological, and medical viewpoint. At the present, oh, sorry.
Keep going. Somebody just seems to be.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. If you have your mic on, please mute it.
Okay. So no one has a question or anything, right?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So
So, Dale, if you could, I can't mute. If you could look through whoever's lit up, you could actually mute.
okay. Where do I see that?
Can you see the list of people?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have access.
I don't see who's talking though. Oh, this okay. There we go.
Perfect.
All right, perfect. So yep. So almost done, guys. So let me just continue reading their conclusion because it's important. Um, at the present, this type of solution does not appear to be obtainable by the best efforts of the members of the STURP team. Furthermore, experiments in physics and chemistry with old linen have failed to reproduce adequately the phenomenon presented by the Shroud of Turin. The scientific consensus is that there are no chemical or physical methods known which can account for the totality of the image, nor can any combination of physical, chemical, biological, or medical circumstances explain the image adequately. Thus, the answer to the question of how the image was produced or what produced the image remains now, as it has in the past, a mystery.
Mhm.
We can conclude for now that the shroud image is that of a real human form of a scourged, crucified man. It is not the product of an artist. The bloodstains are composed of hemoglobin and also give off a positive test for serum albumin. The image is an ongoing mystery, and until further chemical studies are made, perhaps by this group of scientists or perhaps by some scientists in the future, the problem remains unsolved. So, yeah, that and this again, this is from the scientific team. It's not a Christian only team or a religious team or something. These are top scientists around the world. They were tasked to figure out how are they made and what was their conclusion. We don't know. We know that it's not an artist. Art didn't create this image, but how is it created? As of right now, we don't know. That was their conclusion. So yeah, that's it for today. In part two, we're going to kind of look at the specific explanations that have been offered and why they don't work, especially in light of what we've learned about the shroud images. So, and then I'm going to get into the explanation. Well, how do we, if none of the natural explanations that skeptics offer work, how do we explain the shroud images? And that's where I'll get into more detail about the radiation hypothesis that I go for. It's a hypothesis made by a nuclear engineer named Bob Rucker. Yeah, just for now, bear in mind those features that were discovered. And next week, we'll see how we can apply that to the different types of explanations to see how do they perform? Do they work or not? So, yeah, that's it.
Wait. So, Dale, can you give me back control?
Okay, so let
And
me,
then we'll proceed to ask questions.
all right, so let me stop sharing so I can
Mhm.
stop share. Okay, and then, so I go to participants.
I have a question.
Yeah, we're going to get to it right after I get back control.
Sule Prince. Okay, so the only thing with that is I'm recording. So is that gonna
Yeah,
stop
you can stop the recording now. You can stop it now.
stop it? Okay.
Yeah.